The media briefing. I just wanted us to have an interaction. And that interaction, I hope that you will understand that, yes, it's an interaction, but it is a discussion about the character of one of us. And that one of us is none other than Hakainde Sami Hichilema. The events that bring us to this point, you are well aware. They started a while ago. There was an impression, and there is still an impression out in the public, locally and internationally, that Mr. Hichilema is a very rich man. And now we know why he wants to be our leader. It is because he wants the power to shield the baggage which he has accumulated over a period of more than 2 decades. He wants leadership at all costs to cover up his wrongdoing. I'm sure you are aware. Those of you who have bothered to check that one Feluna Hatembo and Milton Hatembo, they sued Hakainde Hichilema for trespass. And the court documents are clear that he trespassed. The matter went to court, and the pronouncement of the court is on record. The court says that, yes, there is fraud in the matter, but as a court which restores the civil rights, we are restrained by the fact that this criminal fraud is coming too late for civil restoration. And I think you saw the adverts from Hakainde's camp. They ran around and said, "Hooray, we have won the case." Just like in the Nawakwi case where they said, "Oh, she didn't file, so we have won the case." Now, why I come to you, I want you to refer yourself to James 4 verse 17. If you know and you keep quiet, you are a sinner. The Hatembos as a family have been divided for the last over 20 years because Hakainde walked into the property of their father, their dead father, and got it as his own property. The administrator, one Feluna, says, and she's still on record, using UPND's own media, that she never sold the property to Hakainde Hichilema. Now, 2 people from UPND, Tom Silwindi and Kenneth Margareta, drove down to Southern Province this week and picked up Milton Hatembo and Feluna Hatembo and brought them to Lusaka and beat them to, 1, file a legal complaint against their lawyer, 2, make a statement that, well, we are satisfied with the court ruling and therefore we are not interested in appealing. What is most interesting in this matter is, why did Hakainde Hichilema send his party cadres to pick up these two complainants and put them in a situation where he asked them to record a statement which is circulated online, and then they turn around and say, look, the Hatembos have withdrawn the case, they are not interested. Still at the core of this matter is, how did Hakainde acquire this property? It is a fact that the acquisition of this property was fraudulent. Even in the court documents from himself, he argues, and confirmed by Feluna, that he never bought it from the Feluna, but he was going to each member of the Hatembo family and say, look, when you finally sit down to share this property, what is your portion that I need to buy? That's what he avers in his documents. Now, all of us are educated. Hakainde has been to the University of Zambia, been abroad. Property on title, especially which belongs to dead people, cannot be transacted in the manner that he presents to have bought it. You go around the different families, the different members of the family, and acquire portions. And that's the matter. And these are the matters in the public domain, which when asked, he purports that people are harassing him. Now, how do I come to this point? For me, what interested me is that this was a Lima Bank mortgaged property. In 1997, I issued instructions for receivership and then subsequent liquidation. The liquidators were Hamwele and Edgar Hamwele and Chris Mulenga. Here I have the mortgage discharge drawn by the said liquidators. But I want you to note that the mortgage discharge was never executed by Edgar Hamwele or Chris Mulenga, the appointed liquidators. Instead, the execution was done by an officer at Grand Tonton, Niza Piri and Mutale. These are junior officers in Mr. Hakainde's Grand Tonton. Now, the pursuit of high office obviously requires some morals. And the people without morals sometimes tend to make moronic decisions. And you see, when you look at the documents, you will find something extremely peculiar. One, they said farm 1924, Kalomo, the Siatembo farm. In the execution of the conveyancing documents, I have here those documents, because I've really been interested in studying this gentleman who says he's a rich man. On the 7th of September 2005, there is a filing at the Ministry of Lands purporting that Feluna is the administrator. On the 13th of September, there is a request to transact on that land. And there is a mortgage discharge, which I have said not signed and executed by the appointed liquidators, but executed by non-executive officers who are in Hakainde's office. On the 21st of that same month, hardly 7 days, the title transfers to Hakainde Hichilema. We are all Zambians here. We are all Zambians. And we've all tried to get title deeds from Ministry of Lands. It takes weeks and months before you're invited to treat. By the time you go and file your documents, but on that same day he files, the title deeds comes out. I got extremely interested in that, only to find out that his famous lawyer, Masha Muchende, was in fact executive officer, Lands and Deeds Department. And he left Lands and Deeds Department in 2007. And in their dealings, the two have had properties together. Now, I was a government officer, Lands and Deeds, Minister of Transport and Communication. Tell me in 2002, 2005, our salaries, could we actually acquire huge properties to be able to be in partnership with rich people like Hakainde Hichilema? You see, there is obviously intention to defraud. And his attempt to silence the complainant is a clear manifestation that his insatiable appetite to want to be rich, to appear to be rich, it is at the expense of poor people. When you go to Kalomo, you will find that in his portfolio of properties in Kalomo, he has a lot of properties, but the history of almost all of them is that the original owners, the parents to the orphans, are demised, and his attitude of how to get it is never to go to the administrator. You can pick any one of them, you'll find that those families are divided. There is clear criminal deception. And this criminal deception, he tries to mask it by crowding himself with mobs around it and causing a lot of injury and harm. You see, for me, a leader is someone who must look after the poor, to deprive the likes of Feluna land and go out and bribe them, I think is a clear indication that Hakainde Hichilema's desire to be leader is simply to launder the fraudulent acquisition of the so-called wealth. It is not just about the Hatembos. I have come across another family, Mr. Mbewe, plot number 74, Kalomo. Plot number 74, Kalomo, if you go and search at Ministry of Lands, you will find that Hakainde Hichilema is presented as having bought it from a Mr. Wadia. Sadly, when you go to the record, and this I got from a gentleman from Chipata, I'll give you this document. Lot number 74, Kalomo, belonged to a demised person, Brenda Mbewe. When she passed on, her father from Eastern Province traveled to put her to rest in Kalomo. And her partner, Mr. Wadia, actually did tender the documents to Mr. Mbewe and say, my friend left these properties. That property was not on title. Mr. Mbewe, Mr. Thomas Mbewe went to Ministry of Lands. They told him that the due ground rates had not been settled. He started paying for ground rate. The first payment was 14,000. The second payment, which was after some time, coming from the village. He went there, he settled. They told him, come back again and conclude, then we shall be able to transfer the title deed to yourself. The third trip that Mr. Mbewe undertook to go to Ministry of Lands, he was greeted with a story that, in fact, this property has a problem. Mr. Walia is claiming this property. Mr. Mbewe, in his own wisdom, took a trip to Kalomo, went to magistrate court in Kalomo, and he sued Mr. Walia. And the court concluded that the rightful owner was none other than Mr. Mbewe, because this property belonged to Brenda Mbewe. He was given a letter by Kalomo Magistrate Court to take to Ministry of Lands. Here it is. When he arrived at Ministry of Lands, I told you, our friends have places in high places. Mr. Mbewe was told, yes, you brought a letter from the Magistrate Court. Can you be informed, Mr. Mbewe, that there's a stay of execution? So Mr. Mbewe got on another trip to Kalomo. He went to the same court, and they issued this letter I'm showing you to the Commissioner of Lands, instructing Commissioner of Lands to transfer the title deeds to Mr. Mbewe. The sad story about this is that when he got there, they said, sorry, we sent you to Kalomo, but we want you to know that this property now belongs to Mr. Hakainde Hichilema. He then, Mr. Mbewe, went to see Hakainde, and he was informed, Mudara, I already bought this property, just to go away. Mr. Mbewe is an old man in Chipata. That property, the deceased left an unfinished building. It has been finished. It's being run as an agriculture shop in Kalomo. Now, what type of a leader is this? Who can't think about a poor man, Mr. Mbewe, and think of the orphan that Brenda left? All it is I'm busy, but old man go. Here's a letter, instructions to the commission. This property is still in the name of Mr. Hakainde Hichilema. When he's asked, can you produce Mr. Wadia? I don't know where it is. Mr. Wadia is actually his friend. A squatter is a squatter. And the laws are very clear. A squatter cannot get possession. And if in fact the court says, look, because of time, we can't deal with your case. Felona, even in the recording which the UPND did yesterday, clearly says, I never got even a way, I never sold this property. You see, for me, I want you to draw you to one of our neighboring countries. Our neighboring country had a king called King Leopold. He called the Congo his farm. And when he called the Congo his farm, he would just arrive, shoot a few birds, and go back to Beja. And I want to tell you that a person who cannot provide for the orphans to have a livelihood, they have to be evicted. They live on the fringes of their farms, of their farms. They can't water their animals. They are sent into the villages, and the rich man says he has the capacity to utilize their father's property or their father's wealth. Is not fit to be a leader in this country. Because the Bible is very clear. Look after the orphans. If you don't look after the orphans, how can you, as a leader, think that your power will ever be used to look after those who are downtrodden? The wicked King Leopold in the Congo, I think the history is abound for you to see. You see, morals of a fraudster are, non-existent. This issue is about fraud. And if we as leaders want to mask fraud in politics, then we are bringing a bad name to politics. When I'm called to the police to answer charges, I must appear to answer fraud charges. They attempt to silence witnesses. They attempt to buy witnesses smacks nothing other than corruption. From this moment onwards, I want to state that Hakainde Hichilema should zip his mouth to ever make this word come out of his mouth called corruption. Because he's corrupt to the core, as evidenced in the silencing of a complainant, a poor woman with a very sick child. And she says, now my brothers can know that I never got Ngwe. This is their own recording. She says, now my brothers can know that I never got Ngwe from this. Now, I've just mentioned 2 cases, but there are multitudes of cases here. And if you as public officials, you are public officials, care to go to the Ministry of Lands and do a search, you will find that his portfolio is littered with the properties of demised persons. I mean, it's morbid to think that you can be in a village, and in that village you are just waiting to hear that there's death this way, and look for the most vulnerable person to entice to treat. And all you see his lawyers doing, they are covering what they were doing at Ministry of Lands. I have been amazed because when I looked at the transaction document, that's the title deed of the documents accompanying the documents which Hakainde purports to have submitted to Ministry of Lands. This is the document. He says, this is a contract of sale. These are public documents at court. You go to the schedule of what has been sold. The schedule of what has been sold is that all that piece of land equal to 2,017 hectares, as presented on diagram 1709. Diagram number 1709 is dated 1955. So it's a court document. That's the original, the mother diagram. And they go on and say, and now Hakainde has purchased all that piece of land as described on the diagram. They only put 2005. The diagram number is missing. I want you to know, as public officers and people who have to inform the world, that the Surveyor General to date cannot produce a diagram stating that in fact this farm was ever subdivided. This is his own document. This is his own presentation in the court document that he has presented. Diagram number 1705, 1955. Ask Hakainde Hichilema to produce a surveyor's diagram dated 2005, which the Surveyor General ever approved. Up to this day, the full extent of 2417 hectares is one farm. And one of the Siatembos farm is living on the fringe. But when you go to the entries, express entry and express delineation. In fact, I want you to know that as early as 2000, Hakainde had shown pecuniary interest in the property. This one Mazwa being referred to, friends, was a councillor in UPND in Kalom. A councillor in UPND in Kalom. And we all know that he used that authority to be able to defraud the Siatembos, and they are not the only ones. They are now living, some in Mapatizia, some completely excluded from the estate, from the property left to them by their father, because one Hakainde Ichilema says he's a sole owner. Now, this is important to summarize and say fraud is fraud, and fraud doesn't die. For me, my interest is that when you look at the entries at lands, it says Lima Bank in liquidation. Maybe the Siatembos were sleeping. He purported that the government was sleeping. He was at Grand Tonton, and the signatories to the mortgage discharge were not those that I appointed. I would want to hear from Chris Mlenga and Edith Hamwele how they delegated the authority to junior officers at Grand Tonton to be able to execute the mortgage discharge. I want you to know that under normal circumstances, the way these documents are presented, if you don't have an inside at Ministry of Lands, you would never have procured the title deed. And the answer to this is in the name of Marsha Muchende, who was an executive officer at Ministry of Lands till 2007, and now he has jumped ship. He's now the lawyer for making sure that the poor people continue to be deprived. And I think that this is extremely sad. This is unacceptable. And when leaders use their power to benefit themselves, it is called fraud. It is called corruption, because they use their power. And that's why I am saying from today onwards, he has shown that he can use his power by sending Tom Silwindi and Kenneth Magaleta to pick up poor people from the village, come and parade them and say, can you please issue a statement that you've withdrawn from this case and no further proceedings. But what is he scared of? He's scared of what would come out to show the world that he's a fraudster, that the properties which he has on his portfolio have something hanging. Otherwise, if he's innocent as he's been claiming, he would have allowed the due court process to take place. Now, we the educated in town, what message are we sending to our brothers and sisters in the village? That when we sit on their rights, they can't come to Lusaka and seek justice, because these people have been harassed time and again, to the point where people like Feluna are being told, you see, you'll be killed. Why don't you just give up? Now, this is not the only matter. Thank God, the matter of BP workers versus Satunya has now been settled at the High Court of Zambia. But after over 135 people are dead, the High Court has said appoint an assessor to indicate how much these BP ex-employees are owed. That money was being remitted to Satunya. Hakainde is at the center of it. You are aware that Anglo-American employees up to now, and you need to know that on the list of Anglo-American employees, at the top is Muna Hantuba. But Muna Hantuba is the executive of Family Life. The ex-Anglo-American workers, and these are ordinary guards, have never got their dues. They were transferred from Anglo-American properties to Africa Life with a package of $300,000 US. up to today, they've never been paid. We have the case of the ex-KCM miners. They have been paid a portion of their money, and the rest of the money, they have been told, you must transfer it to Sanlam. And who are the shareholders of Sanlam? Hakainde Hichlem. So if you don't give their dues, sure, if you have a pot of money abroad transferred from pensioners' funds, not paid your pensioners, you can obviously say you're a rich man. But those riches are riches which are built on quicksand. And what we do today as leaders will haunt us forever. And what he is doing to the orphans will haunt him forever. If a villager is overpowered by us, the educated, we are not doing service to our country. The justice system must be designed such that we must have a listening ear. He's celebrating that he has won, but in his own mouth, he says the court is corrupt. Those are his words. But he's celebrating in the decision of the same courts he has little regard for. You know, happy are those who are, they say, happy are those who weep on earth. That was Leopold's statement. And he says, look, if you go to Naminwe, those people don't use land efficiently, so I use it. So he wants them to feel that God has forsaken them. They should continue to weep. They will be rewarded in heaven. But in any case, have you ever seen any human being buried in his Mercedes-Benz or her Mercedes-Benz? We all are covered by the same soil. And I want to say and appeal to him that Mr. Mbewe is unwell, extremely sick, is an old man. Can he please hand back this property? Otherwise, he is a squatter. He has no moral high ground. He is the least person to talk about corruption. And Zambians must know that if someone is outside power and their behavior is such as has been demonstrated, what more if you give them the extra power? What will they do? As I said in the beginning, they want to use this power to cover their fraudulent acts. I thought that we needed to discuss this. I needed to inform you, because if you know and you don't tell, you're a sinner. I don't want to sin by keeping quiet as if things are well. The multitude of wrongdoing in terms of acquisition of properties from Southern Province to Kabwe to where is immense. And I think that people must account for their acts. People must allow complainants to finish. If in fact what has happened in terms of suppressing witnesses was done by the government, you would have heard Wula Balu. But is it okay for us in opposition to do what we detest and still say that we are right? If it's wrong for other people, it should be wrong for us. As leaders, we must be able to acquit ourselves in expectation of delivery of justice for all, not justice for the rich, not justice for the educated, not justice for those of us who have been to universities, at the expense of brothers and sisters who never had our opportunity to get to where we are. I thought you should know this, because when I saw the clip, I said, no, that's not Feluna. And I listened to what she said. She says, I never sold the property. I am happy that my brothers can now know that I never received the way. How come they should tell the world who received the way? Can you go to a titled property and start to section it and say, I'll buy this, using your counselor, one Mazua? I think that that's extremely unfortunate. Thank you very much, and thank you for your time.